Hello and welcome to Monday in Parliament. Our look at the best of the day in the Commons and the Lords. On this programme, Theresa May pledges to stick to her timetable for Brexit.
Because when we trigger Article 50, we want to make sure that the process is as smooth and orderly as possible. Opposition
politicians at Stormont try unsuccessfully to remove the First Minister of Northern Ireland.
And I would call again on the First Minister. Put the people of Northern Ireland first.
First Minister, this happened on your watch, under your leadership. You need to go.
And Labour calls for action following the prison riot in the Midlands.
Shorter sentenced prisoners are leaving prison with drug addictions they didn't have when they went in.
But first, the Prime Minister has repeated her pledge that the triggering of Article 50, the legal means by which Britain starts to leave the EU, will be done by the end of March. Theresa May told MPs the deadline would remain in place, even if the UK Supreme Court were to rule that parliamentary approval was needed. The Prime Minister was reporting back to the Commons after last week's meeting of the European Council in Brussels.
I'm clear that the Government will respect the verdict of our independent judiciary, but I'm equally clear that whichever way the judgment goes, we will meet the timetable I have set out. At the Council, I also reaffirmed my commitment to a smooth and orderly exit, and in this spirit I made it clear to the other EU leaders that it remains my objective that we give reassurance early on in the negotiations to EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in EU countries that their right to stay where they have made their homes will be protected by our withdrawal.
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn accused the Prime Minister of a contradictory approach to the Brexit negotiations.
The mixed messages from her front bench only add to the confusion. This government fails to speak for the whole country. Instead, we hear a babble of voices speaking for themselves and their vested interests. For instance, Mr. Speaker, last week we were told by Britain's permanent representative to the EU that a Brexit deal may take 10 years. Contradicting what the Secretary of State for Brexit told a select committee that day when he said a deal could be struck in 18 months. There's a bit of a difference there. At the moment, it's clear that on the international stage, the Prime Minister and Britain are becoming increasingly isolated. And if we are to build a successful Britain after Brexit, it is more vital than ever that our relationship with our European partners remains strong, cordial and respectful.
He has obviously been looking at his own front bench when he considers this matter. Let's just take one very simple issue of immigration. The Shadow Home Secretary suggests freedom of movement should be maintained. The Shadow Chancellor said we should have a fair deal on freedom of movement, and the Shadow Brexit Secretary says we should have immigration controls. They can't even agree on one aspect of the European Union, leaving the European Union. And what I know is, with the Right Honourable Gentleman's negotiation techniques, if he was in office, we'd sure as goodness be getting the worst possible deal that we could get for the United Kingdom.
On security, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's statement welcomed commitments on capability, including cyber threats. Without going into details, for very obvious reasons, is the Prime Minister confident that enough safeguards are in place regarding democratic institutions in the UK, including political parties?
Did she discuss with fellow leaders interference by Russia in the political processes of Western democracies, including our own, using propaganda and cyber? What action is she taking to investigate what may already have happened in this country, and what's she doing to stop it happening in future?
Minister.
I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, I think everybody is aware of the way in which Russia is currently operating and the more aggressive stance that Russia is taking across a whole range of, in a whole range of ways, a whole range of aspects.
Can I push the Prime Minister on the matter of security? Viewed from Moscow, Europe must be so much more disunited and weak since June. The fact of the matter is we have 100,000 men and women in our armed forces. You can get them in the Wembley Stadium. What if tanks did roll across borders in this unstable period of European history? What would we do?
Well, I have to say to the honourable gentleman, first of all, the Secretary of State for Defence has told me that actually the figure is 200,000, not 100,000 that he's talking about. But let's look very seriously at the issue that he's talked about. One of the things that I said in my statement was the importance of NATO as the bedrock of our security and the security of our allies. And of course, that is an organisation which is important in ensuring our defence. But what is this government doing in relation to defence? Spending 2% of our GDP on defence, committing over £170 billion over a number of years for investment in defence equipment.
The head of British Cycling's Team Sky, Sir Dave Brailsford, has told a committee of MPs that a package at the centre of an anti-doping investigation contained a legal decongestant. The parcel was delivered to the team's then lead rider, Sir Bradley Wiggins, an asthmatic. In the build-up to the Tour de France in 2011, Sir Bradley went on to win. The Culture, Media and Sport Committee had been authorised by the UK Anti-Doping Authority, UKAD, to ask questions about the mystery jiffy bag, but the officials giving evidence had not been told that.
In respect to the package, somewhat taken aback by the comments from UKAD because we're working under an investigation process with them. And we've been advised by them not to make any comment on that because it's their investigation. So, you know, we are caught out a little bit by that one. We can come back to you with further information about that. But for now, you know, we're working under our instructions with UKAD not to make any comment.
Okay, well, all I can say is that is in writing. I can give it to you now. You can see it's from the chair and copying the chief executive, Nicole Sapstead, as well. So they couldn't be clearer that they welcome the opportunity that this evidence session brings for us to put questions to you and to Team Sky about this matter that is obviously part of their investigation.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chair, but the point I would like to make is that we've not been part of the process, so we would need to read up on that to find out what the latest situation is around that. So we're not prepared for that as of this moment.
Okay, well, I mean, do you know what was in the package?
I don't know.
I just find it extraordinary that no senior British cycling management figure knows what's in that package. But you've made that very clear that you don't. But I was interested in the line that you gave Dr. Gilbert about how it might have been pedals. And this pedal line seems to be going round a bit because Simon Cope, who's the senior, yes, is that what I said? Pedals? Pedals. Yeah, indeed, being pedal. Simon Cope, the senior official who flew out the jiffy bag, he also said that it might have been pedals. Pedals delivered to a doctor. I just find that odd. Would a senior official take out a jiffy bag with pedals for a doctor?
I would assume not.
I would assume not too.
But the important point here is.
But you're both saying pedals, so it's clearly a line that you're keen to float.
It's not a line. It's just an example. As we've said before, the issue here is that we have not been able to ask any of those questions around what is in that package.
Yes, you said that before. Now, Mr. Cope says that he didn't ask what was in the bag. Now, to pick up on Mr. Bingham's point, I think often these things come down to common sense. Now, I don't know anybody who would take a jiffy bag, fly it across international boundaries, and not ask what was in it. Unless he's a travel ingenue who has no idea, no experience of travel, because if somebody gives me a bag, I know when I check in, the first thing I'm going to be asked is, what's in the bag?
I agree entirely
with your reasoning. Had he never travelled before?
I agree entirely with your reasoning, but that's something you'd have to take up with him.
But finally, one man had the answer.
Has Dr. Freeman told you what was in the package?
Yes, he did. Well, he told me what was in the package. Yes.
And are you able to tell us what was in the package?
Well, if this letter allows me to do so, then I'd be more than happy to tell you what I was told.
Well, I think this letter does. So in which case, we'd all love to know.
Right. Well, Dr. Freeman told me that it was Flumicil. That was in the package, a product which is for a nebulizer, and that was what was in this package.
It seems extraordinary that we've had, for a drug that is not banned, there are no restrictions on its use, that the easiest way to get hold of that drug was to get someone from British Cycling to fly it from Manchester to Geneva and then hire a car and drive it to the resort where the team were.
I totally agree that if that was the sole purpose of somebody flying out, then yes, it would seem to be a bit of an extreme step. The fact of the matter was that Simon Cope was flying out anyway, and what we have on a very regular basis. I'm sure some of my colleagues may have explained this morning, is that as a team, you know, I've just come back from Mallorca, we've been there for 2 weeks training, and people have been coming in and out, and moving in and out, and as you become aware of people moving, if you need anything, you phone them up and said, actually, by the way, could you make sure that X has got whatever product it may be, and can you move that and bring that with you? So I think the maybe where this whole situation's been slightly misled is that the sole purpose of Simon Cope's visit to the end of the Dauphiné wasn't expressly to bring and deliver a package. He was coming anyway.
Labour say the riot that took place at the Winson Green prison in Birmingham is evidence the government has lost its grip on jails and is failing to protect society. The privately run jail in the Midlands was on lockdown all day on Friday, with 240 inmates apparently running riot, having overpowered guards. It was described as the worst prison disturbance since the siege at the Strangeways jail in Manchester 26 years ago. In the Commons, the Shadow Justice Secretary called for urgent action from government following the series of recent incidents at the nation's jails. First, the Justice Secretary updated MPs.
This was a serious disturbance. I have ordered a full investigation and have appointed Sarah Payne, advisor to the Independent Chief Inspector of Probation and former Director of the Welsh Prison Service, to lead this work. Levels of violence are too high in our prisons. We also have very concerning levels of self-harm and deaths in custody. That's why we are reforming our prisons to be safe and purposeful places and taking swift action to deal with drugs, drones and phones. It's important to remember that these problems have developed over a number of years, and it will take time and it will take concerted effort to turn the situation around. We're increasing staffing levels by 2,500 officers, and we're taking steps to train and retain our valued staff. This includes a new apprenticeship programme, a graduate entry scheme, fast-track promotions and retention payments. And we're putting an extra £100 million into this. We're modernising our estate with a £1.3 billion investment programme, and we're empowering governors to manage their regimes locally to get people off drugs, get them the skills they need, and get them into work.
This is a failure to protect society. Privatisation of the probation service, savage cuts to prison staffing, overcrowding in our prisons, cuts to through-the-gate services all stop prison working and put the public at avoidable and increased risk. The Secretary of State should admit that in her overcrowded, understaffed prisons, shorter sentenced prisoners are leaving prison with drug addictions they didn't have when they went in, and are leaving more likely to commit more serious crimes than those crimes they were put away for in the first place. This isn't protecting society, it's endangering society.
Richard Bergen. You're watching our roundup of the day in the Commons and the Lords. Still to come, the First Minister of Northern Ireland survives a vote of no confidence. Just when you thought the foreign aid farce couldn't get any worse, that was the headline above another tabloid press report on how aid money from the UK is allegedly being spent. The report claimed an all-female pop group dubbed Ethiopia's Spice Girls had received £5.2 million in British foreign aid. When the International Development Secretary came to the committee that monitors her department, the issue was taken up by a Conservative member of the committee.
Where it says that you wish to build a diverse, resilient and effective civil society in the developing world. What aspect of the Ethiopian girl band does that fit into?
Well, why don't I start on this? I think it's fair to say, obviously, when it comes to a country like Ethiopia, Ethiopia is a hugely challenged country. I think we can all recognise that. And I have no doubt many members of the committee have been to Ethiopia and seen some of the enormous challenges around civil society, governance, and the ability to develop in a strategic way. And alongside that, there are many issues relating to violence, women, rights of individuals that need support and need addressing. And clearly, the programme that you are referring to, Mr. Evans, is just one component of that, just one component of a wider matrix of, not just DFID investment, but international investment in Ethiopia, in the civil society space, but also on that rights space as well.
I appreciate what you just said, and I have been to Addis Ababa, and I've seen women carrying eucalyptus branches down very steep hills in order to sell them for firewood. So there's a lot of poverty there. Do you not believe that the money coming from our department could be better spent? Secretary of State, I've known you for many years. Your blood must have been boiling when you read that story. Don't you believe that the department's money could be more effectively spent on women in Ethiopia than in the way that it's currently being spent?
UK aid in Ethiopia is, quite frankly, combating forced child marriage, violence, teen pregnancies, all those really, really big, substantial issues. And we are doing a range of work there. That is just one programme, one project.
Are you looking at the programme again?
And I think it's fair to say that, I keep all programmes under review. I myself have actually...
This programme is now under review.
I myself have actually read the programme. I spoke to the team on Friday myself as well, so the in-country team and the Africa team, to make sure that the programme is doing what it should be doing, and it is actually doing substantial work when it comes to combating the issues that I've highlighted.
Priti Patel. Now to Belfast, because the Northern Ireland First Minister Arlene Foster has survived an attempt to no-confidence her at the Assembly at Stormont. The motion had been put forward by opposition parties following a row over a flawed heating scheme known as RHI. It's believed problems with how the scheme was run could lead to Northern Ireland taxpayers having to find £400 million. The Northern Ireland Auditor-General said the heating scheme had serious systematic failings from the start. Facing the no-confidence motion inside the Northern Ireland Assembly chamber, the First Minister defended her role.
At no point was any recommendation made to me to introduce cost control measures. In fact, far from it. I was being told that we needed to increase, not decrease, the take-up of the scheme. Although the opposition do not want to hear it, and clearly didn't want to hear it or they would have been in the chamber earlier on, the simple fact remains that at no time during my tenure in the department was I warned that there could be an overspend. As Minister, I of course accept responsibility for the work of the department, but the charge that I did not observe the highest standards of probity and regularity is completely and totally baseless.
The public expect action on this issue. They rightly want an apology, action to mitigate the liability to the public purse, and to see those who were responsible to be accountable for their actions. First Minister, this happened on your watch, under your leadership. You need to go until this scandal has been fully investigated. I support the motion.
We committed when we went into opposition that we would be a constructive opposition, that we would support government where we believed that it was acting in the best interests of the people of Northern Ireland. Well, today it is not acting in the best interests of the people of Northern Ireland. It is failing them massively. And I would call again on the First Minister. Put the people of Northern Ireland first, as you have said you will do, even at this late stage. Voluntarily step down from your role. Allow your colleague to step in.
This motion, to say the least, is a disgraceful attempt, nothing short of it, a disgraceful attempt by failed parties to create the impression that the First Minister has failed to observe the highest standards of propriety and regularity in relation to the stewardship of public funds. But they haven't produced a scintilla of evidence or facts, not one.
Let's get back to the crux of this issue: credibility, integrity. Each and every one of us need to have it. Arlene Foster needs to step aside. We've made it very, very clear.
And the fact that apparently because it was London money, it was okay to squander is really breathtaking, and it's arrogant. The fact is, whether it comes from London or Brussels or Washington or Belfast, somebody earned that money and paid it in, and all taxpayers are entitled to know that their money is being fairly spent.
What we have today, Mr. Speaker, is the actions of a lynch mob. Because here we have the First Minister, who has come before this House and there is not any evidence whatsoever against her at this point, but we have a demand that she stood down, that she moves away, that she cannot do her job.
Well, under the power-sharing rules in the Assembly, the DUP was able to exercise a veto to block the no-confidence motion. So Arlene Foster continues as Northern Ireland First Minister. The Lib Dem winner of the recent by-election in Richmond in West London has made her maiden speech in the House of Commons. Sarah Olney was contributing to a general Commons debate on how Brexit will impact on science. She said collaboration with Britain's European neighbours would continue to be essential.
Evidence and instinct both suggest that collaboration with our nearest neighbours benefit our trade, our education, our environment, our security and our individual well-being. Such benefits should not be carelessly thrown aside without a careful, sober and detailed examination of what the consequences will be. The impact of Brexit will be wide-ranging and not just financial. In my constituency, our hospital relies on the hard work and dedication of migrants from Europe. Many of my constituents work in financial services, which rely on our privileged position inside Europe. Many of our businesses import from and export to the European Union and rely on the tariff-free access and the harmonised standards of the single market for their success.
Sarah Olney. Meanwhile, a Labour member of the House of Lords has suggested that money being spent on the process of exiting the EU should be used instead on solving the problems in funding the care of vulnerable and elderly people. Lord Fowkes was one of a series of Labour peers to challenge a Trade Minister at House of Lords questions. First, a Lib Dem peer noted that 6 months have now elapsed since the people's decision on the 23rd of June to leave the EU.
Exactly 6 months this week since the referendum, and we still are awaiting a clear position from the government on its stance on the customs union. And also, as the Lords Committee report this past week specifically asked for, which was urgent clarification on the legal position of when the UK would be able to start negotiating any trade agreements, whether it can be while we are discussing the exit terms with the European Union or afterwards. When will the government provide that legal clarification, which doesn't have to wait on any of the politicking that we've seen over the last week with the Secretary of State, talking about making a case in Cabinet rather than making a case in Parliament?
My Honourable Lord, we are very clear on the position. We're clear that while we are a member of the EU, we cannot negotiate nor sign free trade agreements, but we can have discussions, exploratory discussions, which we are doing at the moment.
My Lords, I've listened to the Noble Lord very carefully, but I'm still not clear what the government's position is. Mr Fox is openly briefing that WTO arrangements would be quite satisfactory. Mr Hammond commented recently that the WTO option would not be the most favoured outcome. Well, which is it? Can you say precisely?
As the Noble Lord knows well, the government is still working towards its position for Article 50. It takes in views from all sides. As I understand it, we have 20 different Select Committee reports coming to the government in January alone. I've visited 29 countries over the course of the last 4 months. I've spoken to 200 businesses, over 2,000 business people. And what I would say is that we're open to listening to all parts of the debate.
Are there any precedents for being part in and part out of the customs union?
I'm aware that Turkey has arrangements whereby agricultural goods and food products are excluded from the goods provision, but it doesn't include, obviously, services.
Lords, isn't it becoming increasingly clear, day by day, week by week, that Nigel Farage, Michael Gove, and, to be fair, Gisela Stewart, have got us into an unholy mess? We don't know where we are on trade, on movement of labour, indeed on anything. Wouldn't the money, the billions of pounds that we're spending trying to organise this Brexit, be better spent sorting the crisis in social care?
The people of the United Kingdom were very clear when they voted on the 23rd of June. Harping back does none of us any good. It doesn't do the United Kingdom any good. We need to move forward. We need to move forward unitedly, and we need to get the best deal for the United Kingdom.
My Lords, can we move forward unitedly if Cabinet Ministers are putting forward different points of view? I was brought up to understand that government speaks with one voice. Surely these arguments should be kept within the Cabinet instead of being ventilated publicly.
I come from the world of business, my noble lord, and what we believe in having boards that have different experiences and are able to express different views in a measured and considered way.
Does my noble friend accept that there's nothing the opposition can teach us about having differing views on one subject?
And that's it for this programme, but do join us for our next Daily Roundup. For now, from me, Keith McDougall, goodbye.